Hey people, good morning. I hope you've had a great weekend. We've had a good one. But today, we just are going to be continuing just for maybe another week or just a little bit longer in that series, What Happened After. We're talking about what happened after the resurrection. So often, the story of Jesus, the crucifixion and the resurrection are the finest stories that we're ever going to hear, the truth of them, the implications of them, and how we can apply those to our lives. But there was other stuff that happened after the resurrection. A couple of weeks ago, we preached on the subject of the two guys who were on the way to Emmaus and how they met with Jesus along the way, and they found out that Jesus was alive and they returned boldly back to Jerusalem. But I want to just come back to that particular story because I don't think we've got everything out of it yet, not that we ever will get everything out of it. But it intrigues me that God can speak so blatantly and that we don't always hear what he has to say. I think sometimes we can listen but not really hear because we've got some kind of preconceived idea maybe in our minds as to how we would want for God to answer that particular prayer, as to how we would want for God to respond at that particular time. And so we see these two men coming back from Jerusalem on the way to Emmaus, and they are a typical example of people who want an answer, but they don't want the answer that they're going to get. And when I think of that in the context of Scripture, I think of Balak. He was a ruler back in the time when Moses was passing through the wilderness, and he saw the masses of the children of Israel. He took fright, and he found Balaam, who was a prophet of the time, and he said to Balaam, I want you to go to God on my behalf, and I want you to curse those people. And so Balaam says, well, let me go and ask God if I should do that. So he goes, and God says, no, do not curse these people. They are my children of Israel. So he goes back to Balak and says, no, God said you can't do it, and I'm not going to be a part of that. Balak pleads with him. He promises him more money. He promises more wealth. And Balaam is looking at him saying, man, I could use that money. I could really use that prestige at this particular time in my life. Let me go back to God and ask him again. So he does. God didn't change his mind. And God said, no, you cannot curse them. 3 times we see how Balaam went back to God, and 3 times he gave Balak the same answer. And the answer was the total opposite to what Balak wanted. But he wanted what he wanted, and he continued asking, and God continued to say no, 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 until eventually God said, okay, if you want that, I'll give that to you. And on the way to where Balaam was on his way to Balak, you know the beautiful story. Balaam's donkey starts to speak to him, and Balaam has a change of mind. But the interesting thing was Balak, he was going to persist until he got the answer he wanted. He was not going to give up. He had in his mind an answer that he believed that God would give to him through the prophet Balaam, and he found out that God is not manipulated. And sometimes God gives us answers that we know we're not going to probably like, and we just keep persisting and keep persisting and keep persisting. I don't know about you. I don't want to knock Balak too much because I think I've done the same thing. You find his story and you think, wow, this is a radical story. But I think it happens in our lives today where we make up our minds as to what we want God to do, and we're not going to settle for anything less. And then eventually either God has this intervention as per Balaam in the story, or else we get seriously disappointed by the answer that we don't get. We get another one. So I want to think about that for a moment. And then I look in the New Testament and I find the example of the rich young ruler. You know that story of him who came and he said to Jesus, how do I get to heaven? In his mind, he had this preconceived idea about the law and about obedience. And he prided himself that he was going to get that answer. And when he didn't get that answer, he was devastated. And as he walked away, it says, very saddened, because Jesus says, your good works are nothing. You can give away all your money to the poor. You can do whatever you like. But the answer is not what you want to hear. How many times have you prayed and had a similar experience where God has answered? It's not that he hasn't answered. It's just that he hasn't answered the way you wanted him to answer. Well, let's trust God to be God. You know, we talk about the sovereignty of God. There's no greater time to apply this beautiful principle of God is sovereign. His will is perfect. His will is the only good way through this thing. So let's learn from this today. Let's learn to trust God for the answer that God will give. And let's guard our hearts and guard our responses just in case we get an answer that we just don't like. Let's think about that today. But you guys have a great day, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye now.